The holiday season has begun, the weather is getting cold, and Marvel Studios have released the first 2 episodes of their newest series, Hawkeye. If there is one Marvel property of the announced upcoming roster that I believe has absolutely limitless potential, it is this show. Besides the fact that I may be the biggest Hawkeye fan alive, and I was hyped for this the moment they revealed the logo, the trailer for this show, the casting choices, the comic influences have all managed to elicit nothing but pure excitement from me. And after watching the first 2 episodes, I can say I still have high hopes. This is going to be a slightly more casual video than usual, similar to my previous WandaVision discussion, where I gush about everything so far that I like, everything I don't, what I hope to see from this show, and why I care so damn much about it. Let me stress, my goal here is not to predict what is going to happen in the show. Instead, I aim to point out possible ways the story could go from the established starting point that I believe would lead to a satisfying conclusion. This is an exercise in story analysis, not a theory video. So, with that out of the way, take a seat by the fire, pour yourself a cup of hot chocolate, and enjoy my discussion of Hawkeye. The first thing that has to be addressed when discussing this series is the comic book influence, and this is something I'll be coming back to a lot because it applies almost everywhere. This show is obviously heavily inspired by what might very well be my favorite comic series of all time, Matt Fraction and David Aja's Hawkeye. This run saw Clint Barton, Hawkeye, and Kate Bishop, Hawkeye, protecting an apartment building from a group of Russian mobsters attempting to take over and remove the residents. The series absolutely oozes the style and personality of the comic. I've never seen an MCU adaptation that so clearly represents the essence of the source material. The tracksuit mafia, pizza dog, the bandaged beat-up appearance of the protagonists. Seeing these things in live action is so exciting. I was disappointed though to see the dog show up already injured, without the scene where Clint saves him after he's hit by a car. In this show, the dog isn't previously connected to the Russians, and his missing eye doesn't have any significance, so he feels like he has less purpose in the story, instead just there to look cute. So, since we're talking about the source material, I think this is a good place to mention some comic elements I'd like to see incorporated. The first is Madame Mask. There's already been speculation that the villain Madame Mask will be involved in the show somehow. In the comic, Bishop's relationship with her parents is not as close as it is depicted in the show, and she learns eventually that her mother, Eleanor, is working for Mask. I suspect this show is going to cut out the middleman and just make her mother Madame Mask. I think this is the right move, as Eleanor fits the appearance perfectly, and she gives off a very villainous vibe. There's also some evidence to this idea, based on the opening of episode 1. Kate's parents are arguing over money troubles when the Chitauri attack. Kate cries out and looks around for her parents for several minutes, but no one responds. Then, her mother appears out of nowhere and her father is dead. Years later, they're still living in the penthouse, rich as ever, with no mention of money problems, as though the solution fell from the sky. It's entirely possible that while Kate was alone, her mother killed her father to solve their monetary needs. If this does happen, I think it will be spun in such a way as to make Eleanor appear somewhat sympathetic. That she was just looking out for her daughter, whose father wasn't responsible enough to do what needed to be done to take care of her. If Eleanor does turn out to be a villain, I just hope they don't hold on to this reveal for too long, because it seems too obvious as is. This feels like a good mid-season twist, something you can reveal to the audience before revealing it to the characters to create a sense of dramatic irony and danger. I'll come back to this idea of her mother being an antagonist later because it's important. I'd also be interested to see Clint's brother make an appearance. They had an interesting dynamic in the comic, and since they were estranged from each other, it would make sense why we haven't heard of him yet. That being said, even though I'm asking for all these things, that doesn't mean I want this show to be exactly like the comic. I want it to do its own thing. I want it to do what Marvel does best. Take the source material and then play with the story a bit. Everything we've seen thus far suggests the show has already nailed the vibe, so as long as it has the story, it really can't go wrong. I think a great example of this is the LARPing scene. This scene really embodies the nature of the comic. A tired, fed-up Clint being forced to go through something he finds tedious to get what he wants.
I could take this pretend sword, and you pretend to die, and I take that suit. Or I'm gonna real punch you, and you're gonna real fall down, and I'm gonna take that suit.
And at the end here, this super nice guy who kind of annoys him introduces himself as Grills.
Take care.
Oh, yeah, I'm Grills.
Nice to meet you, Grills.
This is the perfect way to capture the spirit of the comic while still making something totally different out of it. But what is one thing Hawkeye can learn from the source material beyond what we've already seen? One place where the Fraction run excelled was in breaking the comic format. It did unexpected and creative things not just when it came to the story, but also how the story was told. You had an issue where, due to Clint's hearing loss, the text bubbles were completely blank, and characters used sign language to communicate. Another was written entirely from the perspective of the dog, and the text bubbles were filled with primarily scribbles save for certain words that a dog would understand. Hawkeye number 6, the Christmas issue, is told completely out of order, and the story doesn't work if you tell it chronologically. I want to see the series do some of this stuff, but do it in a way that caters to the medium. I wanted to play around with the television format in unique ways that can only be achieved in audio-visual media. Something like adding an animated segment from the dog's point of view, or messing around with editing in atypical ways that lead to more satisfying storytelling. Hawkeye, being such an understated character, is the perfect opportunity for experimentation of this sort, and the MCU could really use that. Among many things, one notable aspect of the comic story is how low stakes it was. Hawkeye wasn't stopping a nuclear attack from destroying the country or saving the planet from being eaten by Galactus. He was just helping everyday people defend their homes. And that's exactly what the MCU needs right now. With the recent release of Shang-Chi and Eternals, both of which had world-ending stakes, as well as installments like Loki, What If, and the upcoming Spider-Man film, which all have massive multiversal repercussions, Marvel is in desperate need of a break from the huge scale. When everything is always going to cause the end of life as we know it, the movies start to lose any weight. A smaller, street-level danger can serve to re-establish that there exist different threat levels. More importantly, a personal, down-to-earth story can often do a better job of creating good character development and emotional investment. So I'm glad that, thus far, Clint and Kate are just dealing with a group of mafia thugs, and that the challenges faced have included something as mundane as going to a LARPing convention. I want the show to stay on this path. WandaVision made the mistake of starting as a family story about grief and loss, then completely switching gears and ending with a big CGI battle. The challenges can grow as the series increases, but they should remain within the established scale. An issue that runs parallel to stakes is personal struggles. Hawkeye was a comic that was all about personal struggles, and out of everything, this is the part of the show that seems to be on the shakiest ground for me. I need to approach this one from two different fronts because we have two different protagonists here. At the start of her journey, Kate's main struggle is that her mother is getting remarried. Maybe later we'll explore more deeply why she feels this way. It likely has something to do with her father, but at the moment it feels a bit childish. The dynamic between Kate, her stepfather, and her mother is that of the misunderstood kid who tries to tell her that the man she's marrying is evil, the obviously evil fiancé, and the blissfully ignorant parent who ignores her child as having an overly active imagination. I suspect the show will subvert this cliché by making Kate's mother a villain, but for now the relationship is somewhat tiresome. Which is unfortunate because the interactions between Kate and Jack are actually quite good. The fencing scene, for example, plays very well. The problem is just that in general, her investigation of her stepfather feels more like it comes from a place of resentment rather than a genuine concern that he's the murderer. I think this could have been resolved if Kate had actually liked Jack before she saw him at the underground auction. That way, the shift in her feelings toward him would make it obvious that her conflict with him is not personal, even if Jack and Eleanor perceive it that way. Alternatively, the other way to spin this, and the one that I think is still possible, is if the show calls Kate out on her bias. She'll likely reveal at some point in conversation with Clint why she dislikes Jack so much, something akin to a therapy session where she talks about him replacing her father or something. This proposed plotline would have Kate continuously insist that Jack is the one who killed Armand III, the one behind everything. But in the end, it is revealed to be someone else who killed Armand. This could make for a good learning moment for Kate, teaching her to leave her personal feelings out of her hero work and contribute to something else which I'll discuss later. Kate also, unfortunately, seems to take a very passive role in the beginning of her own story. Initially, her introduction is promising, with the gorgeous opening credits sequence showing how she chose to train herself in archery, martial arts, and fencing to protect her family. However, when she grows up, she uses these skills to knock down a bell tower. I don't dislike this scene per se, I just don't exactly see the purpose of it. Kate isn't really portrayed as irresponsible, she's generally pretty smart. I don't get why she did this. Then later, when the auction is attacked, Kate doesn't wear the Ronin suit of her own free will out of a desire to be a hero, but because she's in a position where she doesn't have much other choice. If she doesn't, she'll be recognized, then killed. This perception of her as a passive character changes, however, at the end of episode 2, when she makes a decision to rescue Clint. With the two of them together, I'm hoping we'll see more of that side of her personality. Which leads to Clint. Clint's main struggle in this show is twofold. Dealing with the aftermath of Endgame, the things he did, and the death of his best friend, while also trying to make up for lost time with his family who he lost for 5 years. With this, I want to take a brief aside to discuss the decision to set this show during the holiday season. I love Christmas, and I think it was a brilliant idea to set this series during the holidays. The idea of the busy dad who's trying to get home to see his kids in time for Christmas might be a bit tropey, but it adds a much needed personal relationship element to these films. In general, the heroes of the MCU don't have families to worry about going back to, and that's fine. But to put a superhero in a position where he's forced to balance his personal life with his responsibility to help people feels like a refreshing way to create drama that is not large in scale, yet nonetheless has high stakes for the character. People have compared the look of this to Die Hard, and I think that's actually a more apt comparison than anyone may realize. In the Hawkeye comic, Clint Barton is very much like John McClane. He's a man who is way out of his depth trying to help people with something he can barely handle himself, all the while trying to hold together his crumbling personal life. Clint's world is completely falling apart as he manages to make increasing amounts of enemies while simultaneously alienating all of his friends. Clint in the MCU has always had his life considerably more put together, with a family and children. This show had an opportunity to take some of that stability away from him, and I think it missed the mark on that a bit. Though he is troubled, I'm not sure if the difficulties Clint is dealing with in this series justify his attitude. His family is back, they still love him, he has everything he wants. I think, to make Clint more sympathetic and put him further on the back foot, this series should have taken another page out of Die Hard's book and given Clint some marital troubles. It would have made sense. After learning what he did in Endgame, his wife decides she needs some space, and their marriage is in a shaky spot. That's why he's in New York with the kids, and why his wife is conspicuously absent. Currently, Clint doesn't really stand to lose anything personal. If he doesn't make it home for Christmas, it'll be sad, but there'll be another one next year. His loving family will forgive him. But if, in the event that he doesn't make it home in time for Christmas, his crumbling marriage might finally fall apart, then there is the potential for real, permanent cost. That gives the audience a greater reason to care. However, there is still another way to create these personal struggles: the Ronin secret. I don't think it was an accident that the only person who knows that Clint was Ronin is his wife. That secret is going to get out somehow, and it's going to test his relationships. If this is to happen, I think his kids should become scared of their father, disturbed by what he has done and what he is capable of. Maybe they don't spend Christmas together as a result of this. For a time, the only person Clint will have to rely on is Kate, and vice versa. Though the comic has them split up at one point, I think it would be in this series' best interest to have them stick together, to show that they always have each other's backs. By the end, Clint can mend the relationship with his children, and they can become close again. The underlying thread between the two characters' struggles seems to be family, and I like that. I just hope the remainder of the show can pull it off properly. Another additional element of the show that I think could be used for the sake of creating character struggle is Clint's hearing damage. The hearing aids are a nice nod to the comic, but thus far they have only really been used for a couple of gags, as well as the adorable scene where Clint's son signs "I love you" to him. But adjusting to his hearing loss has not, as of yet, been a major plot point, and I'd like it to be. Loss of hearing can create errors in communication and other problems down the line that he has to learn to handle, creating an opportunity for character growth. I suspect his hearing loss and knowledge of sign language will create a connection between him and Echo, the deaf character revealed at the end of episode 2. I'd be interested to see how that would play out. Either way, I want the hearing aids to be more than just a prop. I want them to play an active role in the story. When I think about the first 2 episodes of this show, the part that jumps out to me as my favorite is this scene. Clint and Kate having a simple conversation. Besides the clever meta-commentary on superhero movies, there is no moment of the show that better encapsulates the difference in attitude between these 2 characters. The first 2 episodes of this series have been primarily an introduction, so we've seen very little of the 2 of them interacting, but what is there is absolutely perfect. The chemistry between these 2 is on point. Kate has the snarky, confident attitude, Clint has the fed-up, dry wit. They play incredibly well off each other.
Since when did your heart shrink 3 sizes?
When a little girl in ninja costume stole my Christmas.
And to me, this, more than anything else, is what will carry the series. When they're on screen together, the show is at its best. If they can maintain this dynamic, if the interactions between them continue to be as great as they are, which the marketing suggests they will, then the series will be entertaining, regardless of where the story goes. Which brings me back to this scene. What makes this moment so great is the way it highlights their difference in attitudes, and sets up what I think is going to be an amazing character journey. Kate is young and optimistic, far more so than in the comic. Comic Kate is closer to Clint in her sarcastic nature, even dismissing the idea of trick arrows. But in the show, Kate is excited by the prospect of being a superhero.
What about trick arrows?
There are no trick arrows, Kate.
I think this change is a good thing, because it opens an opportunity for character growth. Clint, unlike Kate, is tired of being a superhero. He's old and cynical. He's been doing this for years and knows the costs. To him, Kate's optimism is naivety. She looked out her window and saw him fighting in New York, but the way that scene is framed makes it clear she didn't get the full picture. She didn't realize that at that moment, Clint had run out of arrows, that the entire Avengers team was on the back foot at their lowest point in the battle. The moment immediately following this is even pointed out as one of the contributing factors to Clint's hearing loss. Kate, a child, has idealized heroes and the hero life ever since, without really understanding the cost. But that cost, the potential loss of yourself or the people you love, is exactly what Clint is dealing with now, so it's a fitting dynamic. But for a relationship like this to work, both characters need to stand to learn something from the other. Clint's job is obvious, to teach Kate how to be a hero. She already knows how to fight and shoot a bow, yes, but she needs to learn how to handle certain situations. Clint will be there to teach her the technical side of things, like infiltration tactics and trick arrows. Meanwhile, her enduring optimism and genuine desire to help can begin to rub off on him, reminding Clint why he still chooses to do this, why being a hero is important to him. Kate's job isn't to teach an old dog new tricks, it's to change his attitude. I think there's already a hint of that in the LARPing scene. Despite Clint seeming pretty miserable throughout, at the end he admits he's glad he did it. I hope Kate will push him through that for the remainder of the show. Maybe at some point he'll even wear something closer to the costume she designed for him. For Kate's journey to be interesting, I believe she needs to have the opposite arc. She goes from blindly optimistic to hopeful, but more realistic, learning what the hero life entails. This would help her come into her own as a hero. This can happen if her mother is revealed to be a supervillain. Kate learns that her mother is evil, she is distraught, and her positive spirit disappears. She stops aspiring to be a hero, deciding that it's too hard and that the cost is too great. But before the climax, Clint has one last talk with her, reminding her of the lesson that she taught him with this line.
Yeah, okay, Kate. What am I selling then? It's certainly not Halloween costumes or toys off the shelf.
Inspiration, Clint.
Hawkeye has always been selling inspiration.
I've caused enough problems.
Gotta help me, Wanda. Look, you want to mope, you can go to high school. You want to make amends, you get off your ass.
Doesn't matter what you did, what you were.
If you go out there, you fight, and you fight to kill. Staying here, you're good. I'll send your brother to come find you, but if you step out that door, you are an Avenger.
And now his journey is about being inspired by the new Hawkeye, about them inspiring each other. I can't think of a better Christmas lesson than that. But if it doesn't include the boomerang arrow, then the whole thing was a waste of time.